Welcome to McNair Media with Mrs. Montgomery. We are reading one of the 2023 to 2024 Black-Eyed Susan Picture Book nominees. The Floating Field, How a Group of Thai Boys Built Their Own Soccer Field, written by Scott Riley, illustrated by Quang and Lien. What's most important is that anything is possible, and as a community or team, you can overcome incredibly impossible odds. Prasit Hemin, founding member of the Panyee Football Club. Koh Panyee, Thailand, 1986. Prasit Hemin lived in a village on stilts. Prasit woke early each morning before school to help his father. Together, they loaded the longboat with nets while his mother brewed coffee and sliced jackfruit in the kitchen. Like many villagers, Prasit's father spent his days fishing for groupers and prawns. He spent his nights tying nets and dreaming of the next day's catch. But Prasit dreamed of things other than fish, and last night, the moon had been full. Prasit's father revved the boat's motor and headed out to sea. Prasit waved, then raced along the raised walkways to Uncle's coffee shop. The others were already there. Uncle welcomed Prasit and his friends with plates of fried dough. Between sugary bites, the boys made important decisions. Who will carry the poles? Who's on which team? Who gets to kick off first? Above them, the full moon had set and the sun was rising. Below them, the tides were already shifting. The moment school ended, the boys rushed to the pier. The tide was finally out, and a sandbar glistened in the distance. The boys jumped into a boat and paddled furiously. Prasit and his friends planted the poles and got into position. With the ball in play, they dug in their toes and chased it across hard-packed ripples of sand. They weaved in between other players to get open, and when they got close, they took a shot. Goal! Back and forth the boys played as longboats returned from the sea, full of fathers and fish. Waves soon crept in. The field narrowed. In minutes the sandbar disappeared and the game was over. Prasit and his friends drifted back to the pier, their laughter echoing off the cliff. With the sandbar gone, the boys could only dream about playing until the tides were low enough once more. But this month, the boys could still watch the game they loved. The World Cup was on, and teams from across the globe were playing in a far-off place called Mexico. At Uncle's coffee shop, the boys huddled around the television, the only one on the island. One day, after cheering for a team that came back from behind, someone suggested they form their own team. Everyone agreed. But a real soccer team needed a real field. Prasit looked out to where the sandbar lay hidden under the sea. He thought about their floating village built from nothing but wooden planks and metal roofs. We could make our own field, he offered. The boys nodded in agreement. The next day after school, the boys scattered. Some searched for scraps of wood in empty barrels. Others swam out to abandoned fish farms to collect loose styrofoam. At the pier, they stacked materials and began building. Hammers flew, nails bent, boards split. Prasit and his friends had no plan. Somehow, that didn't matter. For days, the boys collected wood from broken boats and old docks. Arms full, they hauled it all back to the pier. Prasit handed planks down to boys in boats. Drifting in the tides, they fixed them to floating barrels and makeshift buoys. Villagers heard what the boys were up to. Some walked by, shaking their heads. One even shouted, "You're crazy! Look around you! You can't play soccer! Not here!" But the boys didn't listen. Sea eagles wheeled overhead as they worked. Barrels and boards formed a platform. Some boys tethered it down below. Others painted the edges. A few began to frame knee-high goalposts. After weeks of work, their floating field was complete. With fishnet goals at each end, it teetered in the waves. No longer needing the moon to tug at the tides, Prasit and his friends headed straight to their field each day after school. Loose boards and bent nails forced fancy footwork. So did the field sidelines. When the ball bounced into the water, the kicker had to follow. With the ball in play, they bounced on their toes and chased it across rickety boards. The ball moved faster now, and the boys raced to keep up. They weaved in between other players to get open, and when they got close, they took a shot. Goal! Villagers still walked by, but they no longer shook their heads. Instead, they stopped to watch. Some even cheered. When news of an upcoming tournament on the mainland reached the island, the boys decided to take a chance and sign up. On the morning of the tournament, Prusset and his friends walked to the pier in their mismatched jerseys and ragtag shorts. Before their longboat pushed off, a group of villagers ran toward them. Some carried baskets, others waved their hands. The boys hadn't been the only ones planning for the tournament. Reaching into their baskets, friends and family members pulled out new jerseys, matching shorts, and a pair of cleats for each player. The boys beamed, so did the villagers. The Panyee Football Club was born. Later that morning on the mainland, the island boys got into position for their first game, this time on a field of grass. Across from them, opponents bounced on toes, ready to play. Prusset and his team stood flat-footed, nervous. But with the ball in play, the boys remembered what to do. They passed it down the field, they weaved in between other players to get open, and when they got close, they took a shot. Goal! By that afternoon, after winning several games, the Panyee Football Club had reached the semifinals. Once again, Prusset and his team lined up and waited for the referee's whistle. As the game began, the sky darkened. Within minutes, sheets of rain came pouring down, drenching uniforms, filling cleats, and flooding the field. The other team adjusted. Prusset's did not. At the half, the Panyee Football Club was down 2-0. The boys sat silently on the bench, raindrops pelting their heads. They needed to turn the game around. Prusset looked at his friends, his teammates. He thought about how they played on their floating field. Reaching down, he unlaced his shoes and peeled off his socks. His teammates followed, nodding. Barefoot, they ran back onto the field. Without waterlogged shoes, the boys moved quickly, just like they always had. Passing give-and-goes and racing to the goal, the Panyee football players scored. Twice. With only minutes to play, both teams battled for the ball. Finally, a player from the other team trapped it, dribbled down the field, and struck it one more time. The ball sailed into the net just past the goalie's reach. The boys from Panyee had lost. But that day, in that very first tournament, the Panyee Football Club came in third place. On their way back home, Prusset and his teammates yelled and cheered over the boat's rattling motor. As the boys drifted back to the pier, their laughter echoed off the cliff once again. But this time, they didn't have to dream about when they'd play next. They had their floating field where they could play the game they loved whenever they wanted. The end. Check out this book from the library to learn more information about this topic.